Today we'll be going over the installation for version 2.6 of TigerGraph, and we'll be enabling HA for our installation. And for post-installation steps, we'll be showing you how to do a cluster expansion. We'll also be covering a bit of the AWS settings that we will be setting up our environments with. So I wanted to go over the hardware and software requirements first. If you go on our documentation page at docs.tigergraph.com, you can see the hardware minimum requirements we'll be going with for our setup. So multi-core CPU, 8 gigabytes of memory, 20 plus gigabytes of storage is what we'll be going with. And if you scroll down, you can see the certified operating systems that we support. We will be going with Ubuntu 18.04 for our setup. The machine specifications we need. Let's go ahead and provision the machines. So on the AWS homepage, let's go to the EC2 page and launch an instance. For our sake of time, we've launched the first 5 machines. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's launch the last one. All machines will be the same types and same sizes and using the same operating systems. So we'll be using 18.04 Ubuntu and using the minimum system hardware. Make sure the networks are on the same VPC and subnets. And let's just give it a little bit of space to breathe. We'll be covering the security groups a little bit after we set up the machines. We have this one set up for our purposes of demo already. After you set the settings, review everything, and once everything looks good, you can launch it and use the key that you usually use. Okay, so we see that our machine is up and running now, or it's starting up. So let's just rename it so it's easier to find. And this one will be cluster M6. Let's just filter out all of these. Okay, so we can see our machines 1 through 6, and they are all on the same subnet. So let's make sure that we know what this is, so we can easily provision our security group after. So I right-clicked the subnet ID to get to the subnet page, and it goes to the exact one we're using. And we can see the IPv4 is 172.30.1.0/24. So this is going to be important. Let's go to our security groups page, and I'll run you through what we have set up so far. So setting up a security group is really easy, really simple. All you have to do is click security, create security group, give it a name, give it a description, and select the VPC you'll be using it on. So our VPC our machines are using is cross region 1, so we'll be on the same one, and provided rules and inbound and outbound rules. So I'll walk you through what we already have. Inbound rules, remember the IP that I checked for the subnet is this one. So this allows all machines on the subnet to talk to each other internally. Instead of having to provide the private IPs of each machine, we can provide the subnet range, and they will be able to contact each other using the all traffic and SSH rules. These machine IDs here are allowing them to SSH to each other using the public IPs, and the all traffic above right here is allowing them to talk to each other using the public IPs as well. So for the new machines we just created, let's add them into our security group. So to be able to talk to each other, we're going to open all the ports for cluster M6. We'll take the public IP, and we'll also do the allow it to SSH. And the /32 just means this machine. And I don't believe we've added a cluster M5 either, so let's add that too. and we should be good. Okay, now that our security groups are ready and our machines are ready, let's connect to the M1 or the leader machine of our cluster. Before we start, I just want to mention that we need the permission key that we use to log onto the machine on this machine as well to be able to access the other machines for installation. So copy that over and give it a chmod 400, just like it says on the AWS connection page. So once that's complete, let's do a sudo apt get update on all the machines just to have them prepped for missing packages. And once that's complete, let's download TigerGraph. So on Ubuntu, we can use wget and the download link. Once the download is complete, we can untar it, tar xzf TigerGraph, and the tar package name. This may take a couple seconds. Okay. Once it's complete, we can go into the folder we just untarred, and we'll be greeted with a bunch of files. The ones we'll be using are install.sh and clusterconfig.json. So let's go into clusterconfig.json to set up the installation settings. Here's where all the settings for our installation will be. We can change the default user for TigerGraph, the default password, default install directory. We won't do any of that, but you can if you want. Let's input our license. And nodes.ip are going to be the internal IP addresses for each of the machines we are using. You may notice we only have 4 machines here. That's because we will be installing to 4 machines originally, and the 5th and 6th machines will be used in our expansion. So you can see I'm taking the private IPs from my AWS client and copy and pasting them. So now we have that done, we can move on to the nodes.login. So we'll be using a permission key login, which is why I told you to copy the pemkey file to this machine. And the default username for each machine is Ubuntu. And this, we only need to provide the path to the permission key. And of course we want HA, so we set this to true. Let's save that, and then I'll go over the other method for logging in. So if we select P for our method, we will need to provide the machine sudo username, like we did below here for Ubuntu, and we need to provide the password for the machine. So now we have our settings set up. Let's quit this and let's run the installation. We'll run this by /install.sh, and we'll use the flags -c and n. -c means we'll be doing a cluster installation. -n means we'll be doing non-interactive mode, which is why we configured everything in clusterconfig.json. If you don't want to do non-interactive mode, you don't need to touch clusterconfig.json, and you don't need the -n flag, but you will need to actively watch the installer go through. So now that the installation is complete, let's go ahead and switch user to TigerGraph on M1. And you can see between the videos I copied the permission key to this TigerGraph user because we'll be using it again for our expansion. Let's do a gadmin status, which will show us the status of the entire cluster. Okay, you can see the command was a bit slow. That's probably due to the small machine sizes, but we can see the processes are all up besides GSC, graph, and GPE. These are because we do not have a graph initialized, and once we do have graph and a little bit of data, these will be in good status. So now that the installation is complete, we can go to Graph Studio. So let's take the public IP of M1 and port 14240. So here's our Graph Studio. We want to input the Graph Studio permission, or not the permission, the license key. So let's get that right now. And that's it. And we're ready to use Graph Studio. So let's just load up the graph with load up our system with a small sample graph. So in TigerGraph 2.6, we have a small directory of test graphs we can use. So let's do that right now. Okay, so in this directory, TigerGraph /documents/examples test drive social graph, we have a small social graph we can use, and all we have to do is run this bash script setup.sh, and it will auto-populate a small size graph for us using our machines. And once this graph is populated, we'll be able to see the replication by using the gadmin status command. Okay, cool. So as you can see, the script went through, created a bunch of vertices and edges, created the graph, created loading jobs, ran the loading jobs, and installed the query. So once this is complete, we can check the system status using gadmin status again. And once we can see that the GSC, GPE, and graph are all ready to go. Cool, so we see that GSC, graph, and GPE are now up and online and ready, whereas earlier it was off, not ready. So if we do a gadmin status -v graph, we can see the partitions for each of the machines, and we can see that M1 and M2 are replicated to M3 and M4. M1 and M3 are replicas, M2 and M4 are replicas. So you can see, let me drag this one off for you guys. The vertex count are identical for each respective replica machine. And also the edge counts are the same for each replica machine. So now that we have the graph loaded a bit and the machines are successfully installed, we can move on to the cluster expansion portion. So our normal expansion, if we don't have any special tweaks to be done, can be done by following this cluster expansion, cluster scale out workflow page. But we will be doing a little bit different because we do have a HA enabled. So we will only be following this beginning portion. So to prep the machines, the additional 2 machines that need to be added, we need to run this script, which is in this directory, TigerGraph package pool and syspre package. So what we need to do is run the script -I and the name, the IP addresses of the new machines, the host user. If there's a password, we need to provide a password, but we do not have a password, so we will leave that blank, and the SSH key, which is the key that we provided all the way back in the beginning of this installation. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's get the IP addresses of M5 and M6. And let's just take -I, M5, and M6. Users Ubuntu, and we need -K. Let's do it. So what this step is doing is it basically checking the environment of each of the machines we have currently, and also the new machines, and we're installing any packages that may be missing onto the new machines. Cool, so as we can see, M5 was successful, everything's set up, the environment is ready for expansion, and we're moving on to M6, and we're going to do the same thing that was done for M5. So while this is running, let's just go over the steps we'll need for expansion. So usually we can just expand, and it'll tell you if you're missing anything with this command gbar expand, but we will be using an advanced mode, so we'll be using the -A flag, and I'll cover all the possible flags once the system preparation is ready. The new environments are ready, we can go ahead with the gbar expansion. So for this part, let's first create a folder called backups on our home directory. Well, we need to do this because what gbar expands, we need to make a backup of the original data, and that will go into this directory, and it will restore once the cluster is expanded. So let's first take a look at the help manual. And here are all the options. So we have a backup and restore portion that you can go through our documentation and read about, but we'll be using gbar expand -A, which will allow us to use the HA portion. Okay, so this is what would happen if you probably ran it without doing the config. So what we'll have to do is run gbar config, and we'll set up the directory we want to back up to. Yeah, so we want to store locally, and just give it the absolute path that we just created. You can also store to S3. That will require your S3 access key or AWS access key and the bucket name. And you can change the timeout here. For larger systems, we need a larger timeout, but since our system is so small, we can keep it at default. And if you have changed your TigerGraph GC-equal username and password, please change that here or enter those here. Since we have not, we'll leave it as it is. And let's write and quit, and let's run gbar expand -A again. This will give us or prompt us with a text edit file that we will have to edit. We'll add the new nodes with their IPs and the replication factor So now we're greeted with this page, and currently we have 4 nodes, so that's why it lists M1 to M4. What we want to do is add the private IPs of M5 and M6, so let's grab those right now. So M5 colon and the internal IP, M6 colon and the internal IP. And we want to add the aliases for M5 and M6 to all GPE servers, and the number of replicas we want is going to be 3. Do the same for GSE. Oops. And the Kafka server is also needed, so M5 and M6, and replication factor 3. SPP servers also needs this, so M5 and M6, and Zookeeper and dictionary servers can be left the same. And let's write and quit, and it'll go ahead and do the expansion, and we can see the effects once this is complete. Go ahead and press yes to confirm, and let it run. Now that the expansion is complete, we can see that what it did is it applied cluster configuration to the new machines, installed the packages on new machines, and restored the data onto all the machines. So now if we run gadmin status -v graph, we can see the same results as we saw for the 4 machine cluster, except 5 and 6 will be replicated as well. So let's see, vertex count are the same for 1, 3, and 5, 2, 4, and 6. And the edge counts are the same for 1, 3, 5, and 2, 4, and 6. So, and now we can see that 6 machines are in the cluster instead of 4 machines that we had earlier. That GSE is up and ready with 6 machines instead of 4. Same with GPE. And now let's go to M6 and let's take a look at that system. So once we log on, we should be able to switch user to TigerGraph, and it should have a directory of its own, whereas before this it did not. So that's how we expand the cluster after installation. And if there's any other questions or you want to read the documentation, you can visit the site at docs.tigergraph.com. And if you ever run into any weird issues or bugs in the processes we went through today, you can file a ticket with us at support@tigergraph.com. You can send them an email and it will automatically create a ticket for you. Thanks.